For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Amendment at the desk.
Would the gentleman indicate which of his amendments
Number 6.
is offering? Number 6. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 6, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Paul of Texas.
Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Paul, and a member opposed, each will control 10 minutes, and the chair would recognize the gentleman from Texas.
May I inquire, did you say I would have 10 minutes or the total 10 minutes?
It's 10 minutes per side.
Per side. Thank you.
Gentleman from Virginia. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, let me just read the amendment because it's just 3 lines. It says, none of the funds appropriated in this act may be used for any United States contribution to the United Nations or any affiliated agency of the United Nations. It would defund the United Nations. It would take away the dues that we pay the United Nations as well as the amount of money that we're paying to pay our back dues. And I think this is an appropriate time to discuss the reasonableness for our support for the United Nations. The government of the United States has continued to grow as our state sovereignty has gotten much smaller, but now we are losing a lot of sovereignty to an international government, which is the United Nations. Just recently, the United States was humiliated by being voted off by secret ballot from the UN Human Rights Commission. And Sudan was put in its place. Now, how could anything be more humiliating? So democracy ruled. Our vote counted as 1, the same value as the vote of Red China or Sudan. But the whole notion that we would be put off the Human Rights Commission in Sudan, where there is a practice of slavery, is put on the Human Rights Commission. It should be an insult to all of us. In committee, we dealt with this problem, and we said, well, if the UN straightens up, then we'll pay our dues this year, but maybe we'll withhold our dues next year. That is very, very weak, and it doesn't show any intent or any rejection of what's going on in the United Nations. It was mentioned earlier in the debate on the gun issue that the UN is just currently meeting up in New York dealing with the gun issue. And there have been explicit proposals made at the United Nations to have worldwide gun control. No, they're not taking guns away from the government. They're taking guns away from civilians. And if anybody understands our history, they will know that taking guns from the civilians is exactly opposite of what the founders intended. In a nation like Afghanistan, they were able to defend the invasion of the Soviet Union because individuals had guns. Likewise, when the Nazis were murdering the Jews had been denied the right to own guns. And now we're talking about the United Nations having international gun laws. There have been proposals made for an international tax on all financial transactions. And yes, it is true, it has not been passed. But these are the plans that have been laid, and they are continued to be discussed, and they are moving in that direction. Today we have international government that manages trade through the WTO. We have international government that manages all international financial transactions through the IMF. We have an international government that manages welfare through the World Bank. And do these institutions really help the poor people of the world? Hardly. They help the people who control the arms of power in these international institutions, and generally they help the very wealthy, the bankers and the international corporations. So I see where the United Nations may have been said to be set up to help preserve peace and help poor people, but it just doesn't happen. The poor pay the taxes, and the international wealth and corporations seem to have the benefit. We have taken a very strong position against endorsing the International Criminal Court. And the argument is legitimate. It says that, someday the International Criminal Court may arrest Americans. because it just may be that Americans may pursue illegal acts of war, like bombing other countries and killing innocent people. So, oh no, we don't want the International Court to apply to us, but it's okay with our money, our prestige, and our pressure to endorse the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia so that we can go in there and arrest the leaders that we have decided were the bad guys and leave the good guys alone, as if there weren't bad guys on both sides in Yugoslavia. But this presumption on our part that we can control the United Nations and arrest only those individuals that we don't like and allow the other ones to go free and that this will never apply to us, I think we're missing the point, and it's a dangerous trend. Because you say, well, yes, we are powerful. We have the money and we have the weapons and we can dictate to the United Nations they will not arrest us or play havoc with us. Yet at the same time, we have already recognized that the UN Human Rights Commission, which was voted on by a Democratic vote, kicked us in the face and kicked us off. So I think this is a time to think very seriously about whether this is wise to continue the funding of the United Nations. I think that a statement ought to be made. I think we should say, the American people, I think, agree overwhelmingly that it's about time that we quit policing the world and paying the bills at the United Nations way out of proportion to our representation, and at the same time being humiliated by being kicked off these commissions by majority vote. And at this time, I would like to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Virginia.
I rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment. I was in Kosovo and in Albania during this case, and I will tell you Mladic is a war criminal, and Karadzic, he is a war criminal, and Milosevic is a war criminal. So without this, there would be no way to deal with it. Secondly, I have been in Sudan, in southern Sudan, four times. Last time in January this year. Whether you like it or not, the World Food Program is feeding the people of Sudan. As many people know, there have been 2.2 million Christians who have been killed in Sudan by the Khartoum government. And if the World Food Program wasn't sending food in there, and Andrew Natsios and Roger Winter from the State Department are in Sudan as we now speak, this would just devastate that whole operation. I understand what the gentleman said with regard to the vote. We have language on page 112 of the report that says the committee is deeply concerned by the secret ballot of the UN members nations to keep the United States off the UN Human Rights Commission. The exit of the United States and the election at the same time of the government of Sudan, the barbaric government of Sudan, which is sponsoring state-sponsored terrorism, slavery, and has been responsible for the death of 2.2 million people, effectively cancels the ability of the United Nations to speak out or act with credibility on this issue. We have been very, very forthright with regard to that. But the UN has been responsible for calls with regard to getting its financial house in order. And, in the book of Luke, in the New Testament, it says, to whom much is given, much is required. The King James Version says required. For us not to be helping the starving people of Sudan through the UN, the World Food Program, I think it would not be good for this country. This country has been blessed. We have been blessed because the American people are good and decent and honest and caring. And for us not to be participating to help to feed those in the South, particularly those who are Christian and animist who are being persecuted by the Khartoum government, frankly, would just have us walking away. And so I think this is a bad amendment. I understand what the gentleman's trying to get out to. It's a bad amendment, and urge a no vote by members on both sides of the aisle, and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time or yields back?
I reserve.
Reserves. Gentleman from Texas has 4 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to point out that the case of Milosevic is a case that will come back to haunt us for two reasons. One, we're setting a precedent. This has never happened before. He was democratically elected in the country, democratically disposed. The country there was willing to prosecute him. And the second part is that this stirs up tremendous anti-American sentiment. And this is the reason why we are the greatest target in the world, because of our intrusion into these areas, pretending that we always know best and that we will trample the law and the so-called international law because it serves our self-interest. But I believe our national security and our interests are not best served in this manner. I believe it's very dangerous. Likewise, we have had examples of UN intervention. Rwanda, can we be proud of that? Can we be proud of what the UN and what our troops had to go through and the humiliation in Mogadishu, in Somalia? I mean, this was horrible. Of what happened there. So good intentions will not suffice. Just because there's good intentions, it doesn't mean that good will come of it. There is an alternative to a single world government, and that is individuals, governments willing to get along, open and free trade as much as possible, free travel, people having unified currencies where we don't have currency devaluations and poverties in the world, throughout the world. There's a lot that can be done with freedom rather than always depending, whether it's here in the United States or depending on more government at an international level. And I reserve the balance of my time.
How much time do I have left?
7.5 minutes.
I yield to the gentleman, or you want to get your own time, whatever. I yield such time as you may. You just reserve me a couple minutes, but I yield such time as you may.
I can strike the last word.
Okay, why don't you just do that?
Like to.
Gentleman strikes the last words, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I rise in opposition to Congressman Paul's amendment to prohibit funding for U.S. contributions. In my opinion, this would be not in the national interest of our country. With the support of the U.S., the UN and its agencies contribute dramatically in promoting international peace and security, non-proliferation, nuclear safeguards, human rights reduction of health problems, humanitarian assistance, cooperation against international crime, and sustainable development. In addition, the UN is leading the fight against HIV/AIDS. The U.S. contribution to the UN and its affiliated agencies allows the United States to support these many important efforts without bearing the burden ourselves. The UN and its affiliated agencies have been responsive to our calls to incorporate financial and other reforms into their overall management practices, and we are continuing to press for even further improvements. At the urging of the U.S., the UN has streamlined its bureaucracy and cut waste from its budget. The Secretary General has been leading the fight, and the UN has charted a path of reform which has included the reduction of over 1,000 positions and maintenance of a no-growth budget, not even to keep up with inflation, for 8 years. The U.S. should recognize these achievements by paying our full share. The administration has been working hard to achieve the benchmarks contained in the Helms-Biden arrears authorization. It would be a tremendous setback to incur new arrears, just as we are working effectively with various U.S. organizations to allow us to pay those that we already owe. Now, I recognize, Mr. Chairman, that on this House floor on many occasions people rise up with great anger towards the UN and what they perceive to be this fear of creating a separate world government that will somehow rule the whole world. The UN is far from that, but it is a group that works together to bring peace and to try to bring harmony throughout the world. There's a lot that needs to be done throughout this world, and the UN plays a major role, and therefore we should play a major role. And so to pull out, which is basically what this does, would be a terrible mistake, and I would hope that we defeat this amendment.
Gentleman yields back his time.